All right, not today. But yes, today. Hello. Hello and welcome. Miracles with a Twist. I'm Lori Cardona. Miracles with a Twist is an opportunity for us to discuss A Course in Miracles from an interfaith perspective. And today we have again our special guest, Linda Pazos. We we have had two podcasts already, and it just seems that every time we get to an end of one podcast, we think we have material for another podcast. So the first two podcasts were really very focused on combining our emotional healing with spiritual healing as well, so that we're recognizing that there really isn't you can't have one without the other. If you have spiritual aspirations, you have to heal what is unhealed in your emotional body. And so we talked a lot about that for the past two podcasts. And we were saying it's important because we want to rise higher as spiritual beings and in our spiritual practices. And also in relationships, we want to have a holy relationship in every aspect, in every relationship that we have that relationship with a holy mindset, seeing the other as sacred. And so we looked at all the things that affect the ability for us to rise into our sacredness, into our holy aspirations. And some of that had to do with childhood wounds, with trauma, with abandonment issues, attachment issues, responding to micro abandonments. We had so much that we discussed, and we ended up our last discussion after we wrapped up the 4 C's, which we say that in order to have a holy relationships that's based on emotional healing, we have to achieve chemistry, compatibility, commitment to the goal, and celebration. We want to be able to celebrate our time together. And so just as we're wrapping it up, Linda hooks me with yet another line, which is like, well, first we have to focus on self-love. And so she's back, and I'm really glad that she is back, because today we're going to be talking about A Course in Miracles and self-love. So hi, Linda. Welcome back.
Hi, Lori. Thank you for having me back. I'm so glad that I can entice you into another conversation.
Yeah, every time. No problem.
Anyway, before we begin, I do want to mention again, the first podcast we did talk about, me. I'm not a therapist. I'm not an expert psychologist. I'm really just another human being living life and talking about life's experiences from my own perspective as well as others, and learning about holy relationships and A Course in Miracles. So I'm just going to tell everybody to take what resonates with you and leave the rest. Hopefully we'll resonate somewhere and maybe dig deeper with the love of your life.
Yes, digging deeper within ourselves and digging deeper within our relationships. And you're not a student of A Course in Miracles, and you don't have to be, but I know some of your fans who've been listening to you have been saying, what is this Course in Miracles? And so eventually maybe I'll do a return to a 101, which I've done in the past, but it's really not about understanding A Course in Miracles so much as it is understanding that A Course in Miracles is based on spiritual intentions and waking up to what it is that we need to know about ourselves, so we can pray harder, rise higher, love steadily, forgive readily. And so yeah, we're people on the path practicing. We are not experts. We're not relationship gurus. Who would say that? Maybe someone did. I don't know. But the point is that we want to walk the talk and do our practicing. And part of it, when you were talking about self-love in the end, we were recognizing that it isn't about pounding our chest and bragging about who we are, but about recognizing the truth of our authentic self and our ability to rise through and with our spiritual practices, and into a place of seeing others with eyes of love, regardless of circumstances. And so I read to you this essay that comes from a Return to Love by Marianne Williamson. And this was done back in the day when she was just coming out as a Course in Miracles teacher, and her book was published to the delight of Oprah. And so Oprah had her read this, and I'm going to read it to you. it says, our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It's our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. And so we ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? When actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God, and your plain small does not serve the world. There is nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We are all meant to shine as children do. We are born to make manifest the glory of God that is within us. And so the idea is that we're setting a foundation for self-love so that we don't play small, and so that we do bring the greater good through us into the world.
And yet we often do play small. And so the question remains, what does self-love mean? And what does it look like? You know, if you ask somebody, because it's a big thing now, self-love, everybody's got to love their, love yourself before you can love someone else. Although someone said that that's not necessarily true, but we'll get to that, I think, later on. Anyway, when we talk about self-love, we think, oh, I'm going to go get a mani, I'm going to go get a pedi, I'm going to eat good food, I'm going to exercise, I'm going to go out with friends and laugh. We tend to look at the surface of what self-love is, and all those things are taking care of yourself. But, surrounding ourselves with like-minded people and things like that, and keeping ourselves from toxicity or toxic energies or environments. Also, the way we physically see ourselves is about self-love too. And many times, especially for women, it's in a negative view. So self-love also talks about how we physically see ourselves. And I heard Mel Robbins, I think people are probably familiar with it. I know when I mentioned it to you, you said, her high five, so she says, every day, look at yourself in the mirror and give yourself a high five. So give me a high five. High five. Okay. Give yourself a high five, because you are the light. You are a magnificent being, no matter what that is. Eckhart Tolle says, and I find this interesting, because he says, if you really want to learn about not having a mental self-image, watch your dog and your cat. They don't have an opinion of who they are. They just are. They don't have the mind activity that creates a negative or positive self-image. Animals could care less. They could care less if they're fat, ugly. If they've lost their sexual desire, they could care less. It's not a problem for them. So we should be
Isn't he the one who said we should be more like ducks? When when ducks are in the water and they get aggravated by something, which would be like water, falling on them, and they just shake it off and keep going.
Yes, he was. He said, let it roll off of you like a wet duck.
Yeah.
And he says only humans have the capability of hating themselves. People uncomfortable with who they are, they hate themselves. They dislike something about themselves. And that always precedes who they are, how they look. They become self-critical, have negative self-images. And that creates a negative self-mind. And that's the energy of the persona that presents itself.
Well, when
step out, and hence the focus on self-love.
So I just want to make a distinction here. There's a few parts of A Course in Miracles that I think clarify this. If people are thinking that self-love is about grandiosity, like, oh, I'm so great, I'm so amazing, because it can be extremes, right? It could be someone who's just focused on themselves. Whereas from a spiritual perspective, we don't want to play small, and we want to bring out what is good and capable within us, so that we can then do good and be good in the world. Right. It's not about, oh, I love myself and I'm so amazing, I'm so wonderful. It's about, I love myself so I can love you. I love myself enough to see my capacity for compassion. So there's a part in A Course in Miracles called Grandeur versus Grandiosity. And so they make a distinction between the grandiosity it says the grandiosities of the ego. It is an alternative to grandeur because grandeur is of God. Grandiosity is a cover for the ego's despair. From your grandeur, you can bless because your grandeur is the abundance of the goodness in you. And so it's saying that your grandeur is what you want to recognize, that we were blessed, born, graced with grandeur. It is, and if we play small, we're not functioning from that grandeur. It goes on and it repeats it again. That's in chapter 9. And then in chapter 15, it repeats it again. It talks about littleness versus magnitude. And so if you're focusing on your littleness, you're going to have self-doubt, you're going to have self-criticism, you're going to see your shadow side without looking at the possibility of healing it, clearing it, and rising to your most blessed self. So it says, be not content with littleness, but be sure you understand what littleness is. And that littleness is that part of you that would rather function from the ego that tells you, attack or counterattack, as opposed to be patient, be kind, be compassionate. That's your magnitude. The magnitude of how you are might come out in silence, in compassion, and treating someone else with understanding. And there's another discussion about the fact that there's a time when we really don't care for ourselves. And when we don't care for ourselves, we don't see our potential. And so the Course is constantly saying, forgive yourself, see that shadow, that cloud that you've put in front of you as your image, and try to brush it aside so that you see the light that's beyond it, because that light is in you. So it's time to rise.
Yeah. So how does that look like in relationships? Because we're talking about holy relationships and emotional healing. So what does self-love look like in a relationship? It's really the ability to know and ask for your needs. And like you're saying, don't play small. What is it you want? Know how to ask for support if you need it. Like in our first podcast, what spurred this series on was not micro-abandoning ourselves, not forgoing the needs of one for the other disproportionately. How to love yourself is extremely important, because guess what? Wherever you go, there you are.
That's right. And whoever you go with, there you are, because you're the most consistent relationship that you have is with yourself. You're with yourself your entire life.
When I was a little girl, I used to say to my mom, I'm bored. And she'd say, get to know yourself, because you're going to be living with yourself for the rest of your life.
Right.
That's true, right? Self-love sometimes means saying no, having the courage to say no.
Yeah.
And not always being the wet duck, tolerating or accepting behaviors in our lives that don't serve us. Saying no to some of those behaviors, knowing when it's time to let go, to walk away, and just, love from afar or something. This could mean, walking away from a relationship, but in a job too, from perhaps family. It's a difficult thing to do, but that's what self-love is. Right. That it's almost like a self-preservation, and it's not selfish. We've talked about that too. It's not being selfish. And like you said, it's not being grandiose. Yeah. But that self-love isn't just about leaving, but knowing what is best for you and the relationships you're involved in, whether they be intimate or co-worker or, family.
Yeah, I want to dig this out a little bit. I want to dig it out a little bit. I was listening to, because I want to find a balance with it all, right? So I was listening to this online therapist. Her name is Chris Godinez, I think is how you pronounce it. And she was referring to doubts that you might have if you've made that decision to leave either a person or a job, or even leave a family, leave your family. And sometimes we get into this, I call it euphoric recall. You start romanticizing the past and start wondering, have I made the right decision, right? And what you're talking about. How can I love from afar? And she says, you have to remember what it was that did hurt you, how you were being micro abandoned, using our own made up term, and a pattern. You have to look at the pattern, the pattern that continuously showed you that this wasn't the right place for you. And she talks about the you guns. She said, if you're always on the receiving end of someone telling you, this is what you did wrong, this is what you need to change, and constantly coming at you with these you guns, and you're feeling like, oh my goodness, I'm not even sure how to respond to this, because they're not seeing the goodness, they're not seeing the parts of this relationship that might be able to work. Then you might have to reconsider whether or not you do need to walk away. Now, as you know, we just dropped a podcast with my friend Steve Pollock, who taught us about nonviolent communication. And he says, if you are committed to the goal, which you and I have been talking about, if you are committed to the goal, then you would see that as an opportunity to make some corrections in your language. A Course in Miracles says that's a call for love. Can you respond to that as a call for love? Whereas what she's saying is that there comes a time when you have to recognize that it's all shaming, blaming, you, and make a decision. If you make the decision to stay in, then maybe we can bring all our spiritual practices in. We can bring the nonviolent communication skills in. But if we've decided to walk away for the act of self-preservation, which you said, and to love from afar, then that is an act of self-love also. And it is, in a way, it's loving the other person too, because we're going silent. We're not counterattacking. We're not addressing all those yous. We're just saying, you know what? I'm going to be silent now. I'm going to let you go, and I'm going to love you from afar. I'm going to bless you from afar. And that's an act of self-preservation and self-love for each person, because that's the decision that's being made.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah. Esther Perel, I've mentioned this before. It's Esther Perel that says, all of this self-love stuff, you should love yourself before you can love someone else. And she says, no. She says, we're all waiting to love ourselves before we can love another. But she says, that's really false, because we develop the greatest self-love, the strength for self-love, by being in relationship with others.
Yes.
There's a TED Talk by Joanne Davila. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but she talks about using skills of self-love right from the beginning, genuinely knowing, and she talks a lot about genuinely, here we go again, these messages are repeated throughout, knowing what you want and need in a partner and in a relationship. And she happens to work with young adults. She works with everybody, but she works with young adults, like those that are in the puberty stages, 12 to 14, where they're just coming out and maybe looking at having boyfriends, girlfriends, and so on and so forth. And she says, she's training them in what's called romantic competence. And she says it involves three things: insight, emotional regulation, and mutuality on a day-to-day basis, not only with a potential boyfriend or girlfriend, but with everyone. And she says, insight, she says, is knowing yourself. I feel like we're repeating ourselves. Knowing yourself enough. But I want everybody to know I work on these things too. I have to stop and think, okay, what childhood fear am I bringing into this? And what limited belief am I having here? So, like when I'm speaking here, it's not because I know it all. It's because I practice these myself to try to be the best person I could possibly be, for myself and others. So she says, your insight is to know yourself well enough to have that self-awareness, that understanding, and learning who you are, what you need, and what you want, and why you do what you do. As a mother, I have two children. And as a mother, I always told my kids to go out and date and get to know themselves while they're dating. And, like, what do you mean by that, Mom? Well, get to know yourself, because not only the other person, but get to know you, because that's how you're going to be able to answer the questions of what you don't want. So, and that to me is about self-love and developing a stronger sense of themselves in relationship with others. And then the second thing she talks about is what's called mutuality. And it's really asking for what you want clearly and directly. For example, one person wants children, and that could be a major issue.
Yeah.
If it wasn't discussed and decided. And you can't say, well, okay, I'll change the person or I'll fix it. We're good at doing that sometimes, right?
Well, yeah, but you're talking about the big issues, finding
Right.
finding discussion and on the really big issues that can make or break a relationship. It's not like I prefer chocolate over vanilla ice cream.
No.
Some people think compromise is well, maybe sometimes it's about a little issue, but most of the time it's about the bigger issues. If you're going into a fully committed relationship, serving
Right.
the whole relationship goal.
And understanding that both have needs, and both sets of needs matter, and both have to agree to work on meeting those needs. It's a compromise becomes meeting both needs. It's a mutual agreement, ergo mutuality. It's a
Right.
mutual agreement to work on those needs together. So it's not a giving up of what I need, but it's a mutual agreement of what we both need and coming to some satisfaction of how that might work for both people for the sake of the relationship. And then she talks about a lot about emotional regulation, and we've heard a lot about this and certainly been a part of it too. Regulating feelings in response to things that happen in a relationship or with others. And again, we're talking about concentrating on intimate relationships and holy relationships, but we have relationships. Once you're with another person, it's it's kind of like a relating thing. And are we able to keep calm and tolerate uncomfortable feelings and not act impulsively? And because when that happens, like we said in the first and second podcast, we're maintaining a commitment to self-respect and respect to the commitment and the relationship. So, she uses those three things, emotional regulation, mutuality, and insight with people that are 13 and 14 years old. And her findings and her research says that there's less hostility, there's less fighting, less criticism, less feelings of contempt and or violence too. Rather, they learn to early on, as they're beginning this phase of their life, because everything, let's face it, is a phase, learn to create intimate security.
I love that she starts with working with young people, because we didn't really learn about relationships at a young age.
No.
We only learned as adults that something was happening that had to do with what occurred at a young age. And it was kind of like after the fact. So I love that she's initiating this.
I did too. That brought me to, attracted me to listen.
Yeah, yeah. And we were speaking at the last full moon about
the other day.
Yeah, the other day that we're kind of going back old school to talking about healing the inner child. We've gotten advanced in our understanding around how trauma hurts us, attachment issues, all the things you and I have been talking about, and that many people talk about. But under the moon, the folks who were there were saying, good old fashioned healing the inner child, which reminded me about this book, which came out in the 80s, which I think is probably one of the first that really addressed, Charles Whitfield probably addressed discovery and recovery for adult children of dysfunctional families. And I just want to point out, this book was in perfect condition until I got a puppy, and now it's all chewed. But
the puppy's learning about their child.
Yeah, he is the inner puppy. But anyway, I wanted to read something that this correlates with what you were just saying. he says, not everyone was mistreated or abused as a child. Not everyone knows how many people grew up in a healthy, with a healthy amount or quality of love, guidance, and nurturing. But I estimate that only 5 to 20%.
Yeah.
This means that 80 to 90% of people did not receive the love, guidance, and nurturing necessary to form consistent, healthy relationships and to feel good about themselves. That's like all of us. I mean, certainly most of us, and then to realize that not having that information when you're younger and not having this guidance toward the quality of your relationships and the importance of that, then we start looking at, well, that's why we have people who go into relationships exchanging trauma, having psychological clashes, having addiction issues. And all of that comes from not recognizing and not knowing what the heck happened and why am I bringing that into my current relationships. And again, like you said, we're practicing it too. And our goal, you and I, we're talking about doing all that so we can have holy relationships and we can see with eyes of love with everyone and anyone, regardless of circumstances. And that I'm happy to say that in rereading this after almost 40 years, he actually notes in the book that integrating spirituality is an essential part of emotional healing. And I was like, wow, hallelujah, alhamdulillah. Who knew that it was actually being said? And of course, Course in Miracles tells us, I choose the feelings I experience and I decide upon the goal I would achieve. Now, recognizing that, integrated with everything we've been talking about, we choose the goal of commitment to a compatible 4Cs relationship. So there again, we're talking about taking responsibility of doing the emotional work, integrating it with the spiritual maturity so that we can address those childhood wounds and those limited beliefs, break from the chains that are influencing us, and integrating it into our spiritual practices.
Yeah, yeah. I think at the full moon, just interject for a second, one of the participants was talking about the importance of accountability and taking responsibility for one's own behavior.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's everyone involved. That's everyone involved.
Yeah.
Whatever the relationship is. That goes back to the commitment of the goal, which is the holiness of the relationship, of what true, authentic love can be in a relationship. And like you said, family, partner, lover, work, stranger.
Right. Who's in front of you at the grocery store?
Yeah, exactly. Can we truly be kind? I think the true strength of character comes when we differentiate between being nice and being kind. Because anybody can be nice. I'm sure Jeffrey Dahmer let people in front of him at the grocery store. But can you be kind means that when you have that desire to spew your anger at someone, can you stop? Can you stop yourself? Can you be kind? Can you be patient? Can you be compassionate? Can you understand what they're going through and not kick them when they're down? Can you really take the time to see that kindness means that you can love the other person, that you can practice the value of what holiness, sacredness really means? And coming back to our lack of self-love, that perhaps with the lack of self-love, we don't have that strength of character because we can't look deeply enough into ourselves. And when you were talking about Mel Robbins and we were talking before the podcast, you were saying there's things that we do that make it worse, that things that we do to hurt ourselves, our self-image. Can you tell us what those things are?
Some samples of, I think we were talking about what are some samples of lack of love, what we talked about, especially for women, your physical self, how you view yourself, which affects the decisions and the relationships you have with other people as well. Lack of self-love is when we hide our true selves from others. We become like a chameleon or a people pleaser.
Yeah.
We overanalyze our own behavior. We analyze until we paralyze a situation. there's a strong fear of being judged by others. Worrying about what others think of me is a sense of lack of self-love. And that causes us to feel inferior to others, and then we become harder on ourselves thinking, oh, well, it's, me, or whereas if we're confident, that's self-love because you're paying attention to yourself. Remember, we said self-love is not selfish.
Yeah. So what are some of the simple?
Lack of self-love is also when you seek validation outside yourself, when you have to have some kind of affirmation. I mean, and trust me, I like to compliment people because it comes genuinely from the heart. And I think people need affirmations or things outside of themselves. But when the majority of the sense of self comes from outside of self, that's when it's a lack of self-love. So earlier when we started, we were talking about just the surface of self-love. So now we're saying, oh, it's a lot deeper than that. And sometimes when we get on a bandwagon in society about things, we often tend to overshadow those. So it becomes difficult. You settle for less because you're afraid of failure, and you become fearful of things. You're less there's less satisfaction like in life and things.
So what are some things we can do to turn that around? What are some simple steps we can take as we're striving?
As we discussed earlier, Mel Robbins and the high five thing, and she stresses simple and small habits. Do something for 5 days. Give yourself a high five for 5 days. And be proud of yourself for trying. Doesn't mean it has to be grandiose, like you're saying, but be proud of yourself for trying and taking those small habits. And she says at night before you go to bed, scan the day before you fall asleep. And we always say, what are you grateful for? But she says, what was a win for you today? One win, just one, however small. Could you find something to compliment yourself about? Ooh, I'm a good cook. Or I like the way my hair turned out today. Find something, she says, find something little that you like about yourself and begin there. That's what she says, begin there. And after a while, that sense, and notice what you're feeling inside your body and how that makes you feel. And she reminds you to do things that you would do for someone you love. So would you get someone you love a cup of coffee? Would you buy them flowers? Would you compliment them? Would you help them and support them with something? She said, that's exactly what we need to do for ourselves.
I love that. The reason I reacted while you were talking is I'm never going to be able to say I'm a good cook. I can't say that one, but I guess we can always say other things that do fit at the end of the day. And I think that's a great idea at the end of the day to do a self-evaluation and then again in the beginning of the day to set our intention for the day. And right. So I just want to do a quick review about what we've talked about so we can start moving toward wrapping it up. I mean, the importance of self-love is having a healthy self-image but also being honest with ourselves about where we do need to make changes, where we do need to shine a light on the shadow side, and not being too full of ourselves, but being full of our love, not full of ourself, full of love, full of the capacity to love. I saw a church sign once that said, a man all wrapped up in himself is overdressed. So it's not just about ourselves. It's about our grandeur, not our grandiosity, our grandeur, our ability to truly rise and to be okay with rising, to be okay with knowing that, every day I'm just going to do the best I can.
Yeah. And I just wanted to interject something there because we kind of hit out on the surface, but just a little.
Yeah.
I think every time we face issues in our lives we may do the guns, the you guns, and point outside of ourselves. But then after a while, you begin to point, you realize I'm pointing, but there's, guess what? 1, 2, 3 fingers pointing right back at me. And when we begin to do that, it's not a self-destructive view. It's like you said, it's looking at yourself honestly. And I think this is an example of that, is to really take a look at yourself. Like, what are your limiting beliefs from childhood that you grew up in? You know, a situation where a sense of security became my issue. And I had to look back at what a sense of security meant for me when I was a child. And how did that belief affect an issue that I had? And when I began to look at myself, that's when I discovered it wasn't a bad thing. It was just that I recognized, okay, if I broaden my perspective about something, it works out better.
Yeah, rigorous honesty lets us look within and say, I can do better. I can do better in this, that, or the other thing, to be able to make a sincere apology, to change our behaviors.
Right. Yeah.
To lead us to a whole new podcast.
Right.
There was this essay I read by Frida Kahlo.
Oh, I like her.
Yeah, and
insight. This is some profound, unique insight.
She wrote this letter to a friend of hers, and she said, leaving is not enough. And it's a really long, dramatic, passionate essay about how you have to lock the door, don't let him back, don't answer the phone. It's like, and if he comes over, you don't answer the, and she's going on and on and on. And if you have to bleed your heart into the street, and just all these things you have to do to make sure you set your boundary. And it was a beautiful essay, but it was full of passion. And being Latina, I understand that that great passion. And then someone in the comments after the essay said, yeah, but she let him come back time and time again, meaning her husband, Diego Rivera. And then someone else in the comments said, well, sometimes we learn best from folks who haven't achieved their best yet. And I was like, that's so true. We're all just doing the best we can. And even Rumi, he had a poem called Crazy As We Are, about screaming in the streets and the neighbors are going to hear me wailing in my pain. And it's like, that's all a part of, just trying to do better and be better, and recognizing our stuff, whether it's our good stuff or our not so good stuff. We're looking at it, we're recognizing it. And I was telling you that I was late to the game and watching this Netflix show called Eric. And I thought you said, and he works for a children's show. And there's a song, the theme song ends with the words, be good, be kind, be brave. And I love that, because, we're doing our best to do good, to be kind. And that takes courage. That takes courage. So I'll leave you with that. Be good, be kind, be brave. And thank you so much for yet another great conversation. And I look forward to hear whatever else you want to talk about.
And thank you so much for having me again. As always, it's a pleasure. And I always learn something about myself and from you.
Yeah, that's right. That's why we keep talking, because we keep learning. All right. Well, God bless you. Good to see you. And we'll talk again soon. Bye for now.
Bye.